Hi there, and welcome to The Daily Gardener, and thank you for listening. I'm Jennifer Ebling, and today is March 3rd, and there are just 17 days left until the first day of spring. Today we celebrate the man who's remembered in one of the garden's sweetest summer annuals, the lobelia. And we also learned about the man who invented the telephone, but he also happened to love gardening and the natural world. And we'll also hear a great memory about rhubarb from one of my favorite garden books for 2020, and the author is an incredible artist to boot. And we grow that garden library today with a book to help you develop positive, meaningful mantras in your life. And then we'll wrap things up with some little-known facts about the birth flower for March. But first, I just wanted to start out by sharing a little snippet from a conversation that I had over on Clubhouse. The room was talking about food waste. And of course, food waste is something that falls into our bucket as gardeners as well. And so when the moderator of the room was asking for ideas on how to minimize food waste, I put on my gardener's hat and I was thinking about this question from a gardener's perspective. And here were my thoughts. First of all, many gardeners grow edibles just for sport. They never have any intention of eating the item that they're growing. They're just experimenting with it and they want to see if they can grow it, or they just like growing it. Now, if you fall into this category and you've been growing edibles just for the fun of it, and you want to try to minimize food waste, you can start simply just by offering your harvest to your neighbors, whether they live next door or whether you find them on the Nextdoor app. And another aspect to consider when it comes to food waste is that gardening and cooking are two separate skills. And just because you're good at one doesn't mean you're good at the other. And so I always encourage gardeners to amp up their cooking skills because that alone can help minimize food waste. Now, my last two tips have to do with growing, a subject near and dear to any gardener's heart. And when it comes to growing, the countertop kitchen garden units, the little units that come with the light on top and then a base for growing, are fantastic for eliminating food waste. You know, when you order things like herbs or greens from the grocery store, you don't know how long they've been sitting there. And often we can put those fresh herbs and greens in our refrigerator and then forget about them, or they end up going bad much quicker than we realize. And so these countertop gardens are great because they keep the greens right there on your counter. They're fresh, they're beautiful. And then when you're cooking, you just snip off what you need. And that translates to a definite reduction in food waste. And then my final thought on this topic has to do with regrowing edibles from your food scraps. You know, if I had to pick some of my favorite garden books, a few of them would include books on the topic of no waste kitchen gardening, regrowing food from your basic everyday kitchen scraps. For instance, you can take the top of carrots, pop them back into the soil, and you will get a nice, fluffy, wonderful carrot top that you can use to cut and put into salads or add them to sandwiches. Carrot tops are wonderful. And this type of regrowing from kitchen scraps is fascinating to kids. So make sure to get them involved with regrowing from kitchen scraps if you do it, and they will be fascinated by that. And it's a great way to drive home the message about trying to reduce food waste. All right, it's time for curated news. Today's curated news was featured in the Ukiah Daily Journal. It was a post from Melinda Myers. She's one of my favorite garden authors. And she wrote this post about planning and designing a productive vegetable garden. Now, in general, I would say that this article is geared for a new veg gardener. So if you are going to be starting that this season and you've never done it before, definitely check out Melinda's post. But even if you are an experienced gardener, Melinda always shares little nuggets that all of us can benefit from. And true to form, here's a little resource that Melinda shared in this article. She writes, "Consider enlisting help from Gardener's Supply by using one of their vegetable garden plans. You can find it at gardeners.com. And when you're there, you'll find customized plans for those who want to cook, for those who want to grow specific ingredients for a garden fresh salad or salsa, or even cocktails, or even a Mediterranean diet. So whatever the plan is, whatever you enjoy eating, Gardener's Supply has these custom plans for you, and many of them even come with seed packets to cover all of the plants and food items that are covered in the plan. So that just makes it very easy. It's a one-stop shop. So great reminder there from Melinda. Now, if you would like to check out Melinda's post for yourself, all you need to do the next time you're in the Facebook group for the show is search for the word vegetable, and Melinda's post will pop right up. And if you would like to join the Facebook group for the show, it is so easy to do. Just search for Daily Gardener Community, where you'd search for a friend and request to join. I'd love to meet you in the group. It's time for today's Botanical History. Okay, we begin Botanical History for today with the birthday of the Flemish physician and botanist Matthias de Leubel, who was born on this day, March 3rd in 1616. Matthias practiced medicine in England, and among his many accomplishments, Matthias was the first botanist to recognize the difference between monocots and dicots. And today, we remember Matthias de Leubel with the lobelia plant. Now, I would say that before researching Matthias, I used to say lobelia, but now, knowing the French pronunciation of his name, I'm going to say lobelia instead. Subtle little change, lo versus lou, but lou would be the more correct pronunciation. After all, the plant is named in his honor. Now, in my research of the lobelia, I made some surprising discoveries because for as lovely as the lobelia is, the common names for the lobelia are terribly unattractive, and they include names like asthma weed, bladder pod, gag root, pukeweed, vomit wort, and wild tobacco. These common names for lobelia reflect the fact that it is very toxic to eat it. Well, despite its toxicity, lobelia is still one of the sweetest looking plants for your summer containers. The dainty annual comes in pink, light blue, and royal blue. And I don't know about you, but I end up buying about 2 flats of lobelia for my summer containers. I love it that much. And every year I go through the same process. I usually see the pink lobelia first, and then the royal blue captures my attention. And then all of a sudden I will see the light blue lobelia. And I think that's my absolute favorite. But you know what? No matter what color you choose, lobelias remain a favorite with pollinators. And they don't care if it's light blue or royal blue or pink. And if you watch your containers, you'll notice that the delicate blossoms frequently host bees, butterflies, and moths, which only adds to their charm. And today is the birthday of the Scottish-born inventor, scientist, and engineer credited with inventing and patenting the very first practical telephone, Alexander Graham Bell, who was born on this day, March 3rd, in 1847. In 1855, Alexander co-founded the American Telephone and Telegraph Company, known today as AT&T. And although we know his story with regard to the telephone, most people are unaware that Alexander had a love for gardening and the natural world. Early on in his childhood, Alexander was drawn to the natural world, and he collected botanical specimens and conducted experiments. After attending school for only 5 years, Alexander took personal control over his lifelong love of learning. Growing up, Alexander's best friend, Ben Herdman, was from a family who owned a flour mill. Alexander was just 12 years old. He created a rudimentary device that rotated paddles that were equipped with nail brushes. He had designed it to be a dehusking machine, and the family used the machine in their mill operations for years. As a gesture of thanks, Ben's father made a space for the boys in the mill where they could invent to their heart's content. Now today, many people are unaware that Alexander's mother was deaf. And as a consequence of this, Alexander had dedicated himself to helping the deaf his entire life. As a young man, Alexander opened a school for teachers of the deaf. And while he was in Boston, he even worked with a young Helen Keller. Later on, he worked with a young woman named Mabel Hubbard, who became deaf as a child from scarlet fever. After 5 years of courtship, Alexander and Mabel married, and at the ceremony, Alexander presented Mabel with a special wedding present, nearly all the shares of stock in a company called Bell Telephone. Alexander and Mabel shared a lifelong love of gardening, and the couple built a summer home in the charming village of Baddock, Canada in 1889. Mabel would stroll the neighborhoods and ask about the plants that were growing in the gardens. Generous and kind, Mabel donated many flowers to the people of Baddock. And today, the Alexander Graham Bell National Historic Site features a lovely garden that boasts flowers, shrubs, and trees, including a magnolia, which was a favorite of Mabel's. Now, recently, there was an article that was released by Canadian scientists who fear that Alexander may have planted Heracleum mantagasianum, commonly known as giant hogweed, in his garden. Even now, there remains an impressive cluster of the dangerous giant hogweed near Baddock. The sap of giant hogweed causes sensitivity to sunlight and UV rays, and it can lead to severe skin and eye problems, including blindness, which would have been very upsetting to Alexander. And here's a little-known fact about Alexander. The gardener and the children's book illustrator Tasha Tudor learned to love gardening from Alexander Graham Bell. Tasha's well-connected family had visited Alexander at his home in Maryland when he was a young single man. Tasha was 5 years old, and she recalled that she fell in love with Alexander's roses. In fact, later in her life, she always credited the vision of Alexander's rose beds with inspiring her decision to become a gardener. It's time for Unearthed Words. Today's Unearthed Words are written by Katie Vaz, one of my favorite new garden authors. She wrote a book last year called My Life with Plants. And what I love about Katie's book is that she wrote about 39 plants that made a difference in her life. And she shares these wonderful little stories about each of these plants and basically the memories that she has about plants. And so today I wanted to read one of them to you, and I selected the rhubarb, an early spring edible. So here's Katie Vaz from her book, My Life in Plants, and she shares an early memory that she has about rhubarb. Every Sunday, my immediate and extended family gathered for dinner at my grandpa's house. Everyone congregated in the kitchen, and there was always a television on in the corner. There was a smiling pink plastic pig from Radio Shack that sat in the refrigerator and oinked at you when you opened the door. We giggled in front of the antique glass cabinet, peeking in at the vintage salt and pepper shakers shaped like boobs that were supposed to be hidden. It felt like an adventure to explore the house and play with old decorations and trinkets. When it was summertime, we gathered on the back porch, where there were mismatched chairs and benches and another television in the corner. A baseball game was always on, and you could hear the hum and buzz of a bug zapper in the background. Rhubarb grew on a small knoll near the house. My cousin, sister, and I were told not to eat the big, broad green leaves, but we did pick and snack on the ruby pink stalks straight from the ground, our mouths puckering from the intense sourness. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, Find Your Mantra by Aisel Gunner. This book came out in 2019, and the subtitle is Inspire and Empower Your Life with 75 Positive Affirmations. In this inspiring book, with a delightful botanical cover, Aisel takes you through the steps to developing positive, meaningful mantras in your life. Now, this is not a gardening book, but it is about developing aspects of life that many gardeners seek: peace, love, happiness, and strength for your own personal journey. Aisel's book is full of beautiful illustrations and design. You'll find plenty of positivity and mindfulness. And Aisel encourages us to be present, to embrace love and light, to choose joy, and to recognize our blessings. If you're looking for a book for yourself or a friend, Aisel's book is truly a gift. This book is 144 pages of affirmations to help you be more present, free yourself from worry and anxiety, and embrace all that is good in your life, like our gardens and our many blessings. Aisel will help you lead a more rewarding life. You can get a copy of Find Your Mantra by Aisel Gunner and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for around $7. finally, here's something sweet to revive the little botanic spark in your heart. The birth flower for March birthdays is the daffodil. Daffodils are also the 10th anniversary flower. A bouquet of daffodils means happiness and hope, but a single daffodil is an omen of bad luck in your future. And here's one of my all-time favorite daffodil stories. In England, back in 1889, the Reverend George Herbert Englehart began breeding daffodils, some 700 varieties in his lifetime. Fans of Beersheba, Lucifer, or White Lady have Reverend Englehart to thank. George spent every spare minute breeding, and his parishioners would often find a note tacked to the church door, and it simply said, "No service today. Working with daffodils." Well, daffodils were highly valued in ancient times because the Romans believed that the sap could be used for healing. Today we know that all parts of the daffodil are toxic, and the sap is toxic to other flowers, which is why you have to soak daffs separately for 24 hours before you add them to a bouquet. And if you do this, if you decide to add them to a bouquet, do not recut the stems after you soaked them, because that will release more sap, and then you'll have to start all over again, soaking them, and then waiting 24 hours. Now, if you're wondering, the compounds in daffodil sap are licorine and calcium oxalate crystals. Found in the leaves and stems of the daffodil, the calcium oxalate crystals can irritate your skin, so be careful when you're handling daffodils. And this applies to braiding the daffodil leaves. If you've done that without gloves on, you're running the risk of irritating the skin on your hands. Now, the toxic nature of daffodils means that deer and other animals will not eat them, unlike other spring flowering bulbs like tulips. All the animals love tulips. And for that precise reason, I love planting daffodils because they're an investment that I can count on to be there for me in the spring. And contrary to popular opinion, daffs can be carefully divided in early spring. Yes, they can. Once the soil has started to thaw, you can take divisions from large clumps and then pop them into new places in the garden. The key is lifting the bulbs very carefully with plenty of soil attached to the roots and then promptly replanting them. That's how you'll get them to still bloom this year. But generally speaking, it's advised to separate and move daffodil bulbs after they have bloomed. But that can be a challenge too, because that means that this task ends up happening in early summer when there's already so much to do. And in many cases, you're just so overwhelmed that the daffs end up getting pushed off the list and they never get moved. And finally, there is really one poem that is regarded as the mother of all daffodil poems. And it's this one by the English Romantic poet William Wordsworth. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils, beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. Continuous as the stars that shine and twinkle on the Milky Way, they stretched in never-ending line along the margin of a bay. 10,000 saw I at a glance, tossing their heads in sprightly dance. For oft, when on my couch I lie, in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude. And then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener. And remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day. Hey, thanks for spending part of your day with The Daily Gardener. If you want to read even more botanical brevities, just head on over to thedailygardener.org. That's where you can find all the stories, biographies, and books that I share on the show. And while you're there, be sure to sign up for my free Friday newsletter. It has lots of goodies in it, and I try to make the newsletter like you're getting a marvelous letter from a garden friend. You can always find The Daily Gardener on all your favorite social media. You can follow the show on Twitter, and you have a standing invitation to join the free Facebook group for listeners of the show. Just search for Daily Gardener Community the next time you're on Facebook and request to join. Last but not least, you can easily share your gardener greetings or book submissions by emailing me at jennifer@thedailygardener.org. The Daily Gardener is produced in lovely Maple Grove in Wyoming, Minnesota, with the help of Paige Mance, Brooke Bierbaum, and Eric Begay. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling, and as always, have a great day in the garden, and we'll see you tomorrow.